I'm Haley, 28, and for as long as I can remember, my mother has viewed me through a lens of comparison to my sister Brooke. Every achievement, every milestone, always measured against the golden standard that was my sister. Last month at my parents' anniversary dinner, as I helped clean up while Brooke held court in the living room, my mom looked at me with that familiar sneer and said the words that had always been implied but never spoken so plainly, "You'll never be as good as your sister." But this time, something inside me finally broke. Before I continue, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt the sting of unfair comparison. Growing up in Oakfield, Minnesota, our family of four appeared picture perfect from the outside. My father James worked as an accountant at a local firm, while my mother Diane taught second grade at Oakfield Elementary. My sister Brooke was 3 years older than me, and from early on, it was clear she was destined for greatness, at least according to our mother. Brooke was everything I wasn't. She excelled academically without seeming to try, bringing home straight A's that earned her spots on the honor roll every semester. Athletic and coordinated, she dominated in volleyball and track, accumulating trophies and medals that filled an entire shelf in our living room. Popular and outgoing, she had a wide circle of friends and was elected class president 3 years running. Her blonde hair, bright blue eyes, and tall, lean figure matched our mother's vision of perfection. I, on the other hand, was different. While I maintained decent B+ grades, they never measured up to Brooke's academic excellence. I preferred drawing and writing to sports, spending hours creating stories and sketches in my room. I had a small group of close friends rather than the large social circle my sister maintained. With my dad's darker features and curvy build, I looked more like the Carter side of the family than my mother's side. The differences in how my mother treated us were subtle at first but became more obvious as we grew older. Our living room was a shrine to Brooke's accomplishments. Trophies lined the mantel, certificates and ribbons decorated the walls, and framed photos of her receiving awards dominated the space. My artwork occasionally made it to the refrigerator door, only to be replaced by another of Brooke's achievement certificates within a week. "Did you see Brooke's English paper got selected for the district showcase?" Mom would announce at dinner, beaming with pride. When I showed her my own English assignment with an A the following week, her response was a distracted, "That's nice, honey," before quickly changing the subject. For my 16th birthday, I received a sketchbook and some colored pencils. 2 months later, when Brooke turned 19, she got a car. "Brooke needs it for college," was the explanation, though the fact that it was a brand new Volkswagen rather than a sensible used car spoke volumes. Family vacations were always planned around Brooke's schedule and preferences. If she had a volleyball tournament, we would build our summer plans around it, sometimes driving across 3 states to watch her compete. My art camp application was denied because it conflicted with Brooke's regional championships. "There will be other opportunities for your hobby," Mom said. "This is important for your sister's future." Even our shared bedroom reflected the imbalance. Brooke's side featured shelves built specifically to display her awards, while my drawing desk was crammed into the corner by the door. When she left for college, her side remained untouched, a museum to her glory days, while I was still not permitted to use the space. My father recognized the disparity but rarely intervened. "Your mother just has high expectations," he would say when he found me crying after another cutting remark about why I couldn't be more like my sister. "She wants what's best for both of you." Sometimes he would slip me extra art supplies or take me to museums when Mom and Brooke were at sports events, small gestures of support that helped me survive the constant comparisons. I developed coping mechanisms early. I became skilled at flying under the radar, keeping my interests and achievements to myself to avoid the inevitable comparison. I found validation from teachers who appreciated my creative thinking and friends who valued my loyalty and listening skills. My high school art teacher, Ms. Payton, became a particular source of encouragement, allowing me to spend lunch periods in her classroom working on projects. "You have a unique perspective, Haley," she would tell me. "Don't let anyone convince you that's not valuable." But no matter how much external validation I received, my mother's dismissal left deep wounds. I internalized the message that I was somehow deficient, that my best would never be good enough. I began to introduce myself to others as Brooke Carter's sister, as though that relationship was my most defining characteristic. By the time I graduated high school, I had developed a reflexive flinch whenever my mother began a sentence with "your sister." Those words inevitably preceded a comparison I would fail to measure up to. I learned to brace myself at family gatherings when relatives would ask what I was doing, their interest visibly waning when my accomplishments didn't match the impressiveness of Brooke's law school acceptance or internship at a prestigious firm. The saddest part was watching how my relationship with Brooke deteriorated over the years. As young children, we had been close. She would read me stories and teach me games, protective and kind in the way many older siblings are. But as our mother's favoritism became more pronounced, a wedge was driven between us. Brooke began to adopt our mother's dismissive attitude, perhaps unconsciously. By high school, our interactions were limited to superficial pleasantries, the natural bond between sisters eroded by the constant positioning of us as competitor and champion. When college application time came around, I chose an art school in Chicago, partly because of its excellent graphic design program but mostly because it was far from Minnesota and nowhere near the Ivy League school Brooke attended. For the first time, I felt I might have a chance to define myself on my own terms, away from the shadow of my sister's achievements. The day I left for college, my mother's parting words were, "Don't waste this opportunity. Your sister made Dean's List her first semester. No, I love you, no, I'll miss you," just one final reminder that whatever I did, Brooke had done it better. After graduating from art school with honors, an achievement that earned a perfunctory "that's nice" from my mother and a no-show at my ceremony because Brooke had a law review mixer the same weekend, I built a life for myself in Chicago. I secured a job as a graphic designer at Bluestone Creative, a small but respected agency that specialized in branding for sustainable businesses. While not the prestigious corporate position my mother would have preferred, it was fulfilling work that aligned with my values. My apartment in Wicker Park was modest but entirely mine. I'd decorated it with local art, thriving plants, and furniture I'd restored myself. It wasn't a luxury high-rise like the one Brooke lived in Manhattan, but visitors often commented on how warm and inviting it felt. For the first time, I had created a space where I didn't feel measured against an impossible standard. My boyfriend Kyle, a web developer I'd met through work, was supportive and understanding. Having grown up with 4 siblings in a household where individuality was celebrated, he was initially baffled by my family dynamic but quickly became my strongest ally. "I don't get it," he said after the first time he witnessed a phone call with my mother. "She spent 15 minutes talking about Brooke's caseload without once asking about your promotion." Despite the physical distance from my family, the pattern of comparison continued. Sunday phone calls with my mother followed a predictable script, a brief "how are you?" followed by detailed updates on Brooke's latest achievements, ending with thinly veiled suggestions about how I could be doing better. Brooke just closed a huge case for her firm. The partners took her out to celebrate at that famous restaurant, you know, the one with the celebrity chef. Have you thought any more about applying to that advertising agency I sent you the article about? I'm sure Brooke could put in a word with one of her clients who has connections there. When I tried to establish boundaries by changing the subject or highlighting my own successes, my mother would skillfully redirect the conversation. "That's nice that you got that small business account, honey. Did I tell you Brooke is being considered for a junior partner track?" At only 31. The youngest ever at her firm. Even my social media became a battlefield. My mother rarely engaged with my posts about design projects or Chicago adventures, but she constantly shared Brooke's professional updates with comments like "so proud of my brilliant daughter." The contrast was so obvious that friends occasionally asked if my mother had 2 separate accounts. Surely the woman who gushed about one daughter couldn't be the same one who ignored the other. Holidays were particularly difficult. Each Christmas and Thanksgiving became a showcase for Brooke's accomplishments, with dinner conversations revolving around her cases, her clients, and her social connections. When I brought Kyle home for the first time, my mother spent most of the evening telling him about Brooke's boyfriend Seth, a surgeon from a prominent Boston family, only stopping when my father gently redirected the conversation. the discrepancy in gift-giving continued into adulthood. One Christmas, Brooke received a designer watch and a spa weekend, while I opened a generic sweater from a department store. "I know how practical you are, Haley," my mother said when she noticed my expression. "Brooke has to maintain a certain appearance for her position." I began seeing a therapist, Dr. Winters, to work through the feelings of inadequacy that followed me despite my success. Our weekly sessions became a lifeline as I unpacked decades of conditional love and impossible standards. "What you're describing is a common dynamic in families," Dr. Winters explained. "The golden child versus the scapegoat. It says nothing about your worth and everything about your mother's own insecurities and need for validation through her children." We worked on exercises to internalize the understanding that my value wasn't determined by my mother's perception. I practiced setting boundaries and developed scripts for redirecting painful conversations. But despite the progress I made in therapy, family interactions continued to trigger deep-seated feelings of inadequacy. When I called to share news about leading the rebranding of a well-known sustainable fashion company, my biggest project yet, my mother listened for approximately 30 seconds before cutting in. "That's nice, honey. Did you see the article I sent about Brooke? Her case was mentioned in the New York Times. I've ordered 5 copies. I'll send you one." At 30, Brooke got engaged to Seth with a lavish party at an upscale New York venue. My parents flew out for a week to help plan and celebrate. When Kyle and I discussed moving in together after 2 years of dating, my mother's response was, "Are you sure that's wise? You've only known him for 2 years. Brooke and Seth dated for 3 before getting engaged." The most frustrating aspect was how my mother's behavior impacted my relationship with Brooke. Any natural sisterly bond we might have developed as adults was stunted by the constant competition my mother fostered. Our interactions became increasingly awkward and infrequent. On the rare occasions when we spoke without our mother present, there were glimpses of genuine connection, quickly overshadowed by the ingrained patterns of our childhood. After one particularly difficult Christmas where my mother spent the entire dinner detailing Brooke's honeymoon in the Maldives, a trip they had helped finance, Kyle found me crying in my old bedroom. "You know this isn't normal, right?" he said gently. "The way she treats you, the constant comparisons, it's not just annoying, Haley. It's emotional abuse." I had never labeled it that way before, but hearing the words gave form to the nebulous pain I'd carried for years. Something shifted in me that night, a small seed of righteous anger taking root beneath the familiar soil of inadequacy. For the first time, I began to consider that my mother's treatment wasn't something I had to accept as the natural order of things. It was something I could, perhaps should, challenge. But confronting decades of established family dynamics would require more courage than I had yet mustered. It would take a particularly cutting remark, delivered at a moment when I was finally strong enough to respond differently, to break the pattern that had defined my life for 28 years. My parents' 35th anniversary arrived during a particularly successful period in my career. I had just completed the sustainable fashion company rebrand, which had been featured in several design publications and even garnered a mention in Fast Company. Kyle and I had moved in together, and our apartment renovation blog had attracted a small but enthusiastic following. For once, I felt confident enough to face my family without the usual dread. The celebration was planned for the last weekend in June at my parents' home in Minnesota. My mother had organized a formal dinner with extended family and close friends, about 30 people in total. I offered to come early to help with preparations, a gesture my mother accepted with a distracted "if you want to, sure." Kyle and I arrived Thursday evening for the Saturday celebration. Brooke and Seth wouldn't be arriving until Friday night due to their busy schedules, a fact my mother mentioned approximately every 30 minutes as we prepared food and decorated the backyard. Brooke's bringing a special champagne that one of her clients imports. It's not available to the public yet, she informed us as we arranged flowers. And Seth is going to say a few words during the toast. He's such a natural public speaker. I focused on creating beautiful centerpieces for each table, incorporating my parents' wedding photos and memorabilia from their 35 years together. It was creative work I enjoyed, and Kyle's presence helped buffer the subtle digs my mother continued to make. Brooke would have arranged those roses differently, but I suppose this looks nice too, she said, rearranging one of my carefully crafted centerpieces. By Friday afternoon, the house was transformed, with string lights crisscrossing the backyard, tables set with my mother's best china, and a display table featuring photos from my parents' life together. I had created a digital slideshow that would play during the dinner, set to my parents' favorite songs. My father pulled me aside as I finalized it. "This looks wonderful, Haley," he said warmly. "You've always had such a good eye for these things. Your mother may not say it, but she notices." His words were meant to comfort, but they highlighted the fundamental issue: my mother's continued inability to acknowledge my contributions directly. Brooke and Seth arrived with the expected fanfare. My mother rushed to the door at the sound of their car, embracing them both effusively. "The guests of honor have arrived," she announced, though technically my parents were the guests of honor at their own anniversary party. Dinner that evening was a preview of the dynamics that would play out at the main event. Brooke detailed her latest high-profile case, Seth discussed a complex surgery he had performed, and my mother basked in their reflected glory. When Kyle mentioned our blog and the vintage furniture restoration techniques we'd been featuring, my mother nodded vaguely before turning to Seth to ask about his parents' recent trip to Japan. The next morning brought the usual chaos of last-minute preparations. I worked quietly in the background, confirming details with the caterers, setting up the sound system, and making sure everything was in place. By the time guests began arriving at 6, I was emotionally exhausted but putting on a brave face. The cocktail hour passed in a blur of greetings and small talk. My mother's friends cooed over Brooke's designer dress and Seth's charming anecdotes, while my father's colleagues asked polite questions about my work in Chicago. Aunt Patricia, my father's sister and the one relative who had always seen me clearly, made a point of complimenting the slideshow and decorations. "You've always been the artistic one," she said, squeezing my hand. "This place looks magical because of you." Dinner was served at 7:30, with guests seated at 4 round tables in the backyard. My parents, Brooke and Seth, Kyle and I, and my father's brother and his wife occupied the center table. As the salad course was served, conversation turned to family updates. My mother proudly announced that Brooke had recently been assigned to her firm's most prestigious client, a tech company preparing for an IPO. "She'll be working directly with the CEO," she added, beaming. "They specifically requested her after her success with their last legal issue." As the table offered congratulations, I saw an opening to share my own news. "I'm excited about a new project too," I said, trying to match my sister's confident tone. The rebrand I led was featured in Fast Company last month, and I'd been approached about teaching a guest seminar at my alma mater. For a brief moment, there was a flicker of interest around the table. Then my mother cleared her throat. "Speaking of impressive careers, Seth is being considered for chief of surgery," she said, effectively cutting off any response to my announcement. "The youngest in the hospital's history." I felt Kyle's hand squeeze my knee under the table, a silent gesture of support and shared frustration. The pattern continued through the main course, with my mother steering every conversation back to Brooke and Seth's accomplishments. When my Uncle Dave asked about my design work, my mother interrupted my response to remind everyone about Brooke's law review article that had been cited in a Supreme Court brief. By the time dessert was served, I had fallen into familiar silence, picking at my cake while conversation flowed around me. The formal toast to my parents temporarily shifted focus, with heartfelt words about their marriage and legacy. I noticed with a pang that while my father's speech mentioned both his daughters with equal pride, my mother's only referenced Brooke's incredible achievements that make us so proud. As the evening wound down, guests began to depart. I slipped into the kitchen to help clean up while Brooke continued entertaining the remaining guests with stories of her high-profile clients. Kyle offered to join me, but I encouraged him to enjoy the conversations. At least one of us should have a pleasant evening. I was loading the dishwasher when my mother entered carrying a stack of dessert plates. She surveyed my work with her usual critical eye. "You're putting too many glasses on the top rack," she said, rearranging them. "Brooke always arranges them more efficiently." Speaking of which, did you hear her talking about the charity auction she organized? Raised over $100,000. Always thinking of others, that girl. I continued silently loading dishes, a lifetime of practice in swallowing my responses. Seth's mother was just telling me they're looking at properties in the Hamptons, she continued. Imagine a vacation home before 35. And here you are still renting in Chicago. I don't understand why you won't apply to those bigger firms I've told you about. Brooke could make some introductions. I placed a serving platter carefully in the sink. My career is going well, Mom. I'm doing work I'm proud of. She made a dismissive noise. Pride doesn't pay the bills, Haley. When I was your age, I was hoping for more from you. But I suppose we need to accept that you'll never be as good as your sister. The words hung in the air between us. Though the sentiment had been implied countless times throughout my life, hearing it stated so bluntly, with that familiar sneering tone, created a sudden, profound stillness within me. Time seemed to stop as 28 years of accumulated pain crystallized into a single, clarifying moment. I stood frozen, hands submerged in soapy water, my mother's words echoing in my mind. You'll never be as good as your sister. The naked truth of what she believed, had always believed, laid bare between us. My first reaction was familiar, the hot flush of shame spreading across my face, the tightening in my throat, the instinct to make myself smaller. For a moment, I was 8 years old again, showing my mother a drawing I'd worked on for hours only to have her glance at it and ask why I couldn't apply myself to math the way Brooke did. But beneath the shame, something else was building, a volcanic pressure of emotions too long suppressed. Years of diminishment, of careful self-erasure to avoid unfavorable comparisons, of achievements dismissed and efforts unacknowledged, all of it surged upward, threatening to overwhelm me. I need a minute, I managed to say, my voice barely audible as I dried my hands and walked out of the kitchen. I moved through the house on autopilot, past the living room where Brooke was still holding court, past my father deep in conversation with his brother, up the stairs to the bathroom where I'd once hidden as a teenager when the comparisons became too much to bear. I locked the door and gripped the edges of the sink, finally meeting my own eyes in the mirror. My reflection stared back, face flushed, eyes brimming with unshed tears. My chest felt tight, each breath a conscious effort as memories flooded through me. My 10th birthday party, where my mother spent the afternoon telling her friends about Brooke's recent academic awards. My high school graduation, where her primary concern was whether my honor cords were as numerous as Brooke's had been. My college acceptance letter, met with well, it's not Ivy League, but I suppose it's fine for what you want to do. My first gallery showing, which she attended for exactly 20 minutes before leaving early to take a call about Brooke's law school applications. The pattern continued through every significant moment of my life, moments that should have been celebrations of my unique journey instead reduced to pale comparisons against the golden standard of my sister. My heart raced, and the edges of my vision began to blur. I recognized the beginning of a panic attack, something I hadn't experienced since my early days in Chicago when the pressure of proving myself worthy of my escape had nearly crushed me. I slid down to the cool tile floor, drawing my knees to my chest and forcing myself to breathe deeply the way Dr. Winters had taught me. In, 2, 3, 4. Hold, 2, 3, 4. Out, 2, 3, 4. As my breathing slowed and the room stopped spinning, clarity began to emerge through the emotional storm. A simple, powerful truth that Dr. Winters had been trying to help me see for months: this would never stop. Not unless I stopped it. My mother would never spontaneously recognize my worth. She would never wake up one day and suddenly appreciate my unique qualities and achievements. No accomplishment would ever be enough to escape the shadow of comparison. I could win a Pulitzer, and she would ask why it wasn't a Nobel like the one she imagined Brooke would someday receive. The realization wasn't new, but my response to it was shifting. For the first time I felt not just hurt but angry. Not a destructive, lashing out anger, but the clarifying burn of righteous indignation. I had spent my life contorting myself to earn approval that was never going to come, dimming my light to avoid outshining a sister who had been positioned as the sun in our family's universe. I stood up and again faced my reflection, seeing myself with new eyes. I was Haley Carter. I had built a successful career doing work that mattered to me. I had cultivated deep, meaningful relationships with people who valued me for exactly who I was. I had created a life that reflected my values and brought me genuine satisfaction. And none of that, not one single part of it, was diminished by comparison to anyone else's path, including my sister's. Enough, I whispered to my reflection. Then more firmly, enough. The word carried the weight of decision. I would no longer participate in my own diminishment. I would no longer nod and smile and swallow my truth to keep peace in a family that had never extended me the same courtesy. I would no longer measure my worth through my mother's distorted lens. I splashed cool water on my face, blotted it dry with a towel, and straightened my shoulders. The woman in the mirror looked different somehow, stronger, more defined, as though a lifetime of soft focus had suddenly sharpened into clarity. Whatever happened next, I would face it as this version of myself, the real Haley, not the faded shadow I had allowed myself to become in my family's presence. I took one final deep breath, unlocked the bathroom door, and headed back downstairs to the kitchen where my mother would undoubtedly still be cataloging all the ways her daughters differed in value. For the first time in my life, I was ready to speak my truth, whatever the consequences might be. When I returned to the kitchen, my mother was wiping down countertops, her movements brisk and efficient. She glanced up as I entered. "Finally," she said. "I've nearly finished without you." Brooke offered to help, but I told her to enjoy her time with the guests. She works so hard, she deserves to relax when she's home. In the past, this casual dismissal would have stung. Now, it merely confirmed what I already knew. This pattern was deeply ingrained and would not change unless I changed my response to it. I moved to the sink and began rinsing the remaining dishes with deliberate calm. "The party turned out well," I said. "Dad seemed really happy." "Yes, though the caterer overcooked the salmon." Brooke noticed it immediately, she has such a refined palate. "That's what comes from dining at New York's finest restaurants, I suppose." Speaking of which, did you hear her mention that new client of hers owns that 3-star Michelin restaurant? She and Seth are going next week as his personal guests. I took a deep breath, centered myself, and turned to face her. "Mom, can we talk for a minute?" Something in my tone must have registered because she paused, dishcloth in hand. "About what?" "About what you said earlier. About me never being as good as Brooke." Her expression flickered between surprise and defensiveness. "Oh, Haley, don't be so sensitive. I was just making an observation." "It wasn't an observation, Mom. It was a judgment. One you've been making my entire life." She sighed dramatically. "Here we go again with the theatrics. This is why I worry about you, everything is always so personal." Brooke understands the value of constructive feedback. I felt the familiar pull to retreat, to apologize, to smooth things over. Instead, I held my ground. "What you offer isn't constructive feedback. It's constant comparison to a standard you've decided is the only one that matters." "That's ridiculous. I've always supported both my daughters." "Have you?" "Because from where I stand, you've spent my entire life measuring me against Brooke and finding me wanting." My mother's posture stiffened. "I've only ever wanted what's best for you. If pointing out areas where you could improve is somehow harmful in your view." "It's not about pointing out areas for improvement," I interrupted, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. "It's about never, not once, accepting me for who I actually am instead of who you wish I was." "That's not fair, Haley. I've accepted plenty of your choices." The way she hesitated made it clear that choices was a substitute for shortcomings. "You've tolerated them, Mom. There's a difference. You've tolerated my career, my relationship, my apartment, my entire life, all while making it abundantly clear that none of it measures up to your expectations. Well, excuse me for having high standards for my children." Her voice rose slightly, drawing the attention of my father, who appeared in the doorway with a concerned expression. "Everything okay in here?" he asked, glancing between us. "Your daughter is apparently upset that I want her to succeed in life," my mother said. I shook my head. "That's not what this is about, Dad. Mom just told me, explicitly, that I'll never be as good as Brooke. And I'm finally addressing the fact that she's been sending me that message my entire life." My father's face fell. "Diane, you didn't say that, did you?" "Oh, for heaven's sake," my mother huffed. "She's taking things out of context. I simply pointed out that she could be doing more with her talents if she applied herself the way Brooke does." "That's not what you said," I replied calmly. "And even if it were, it would still be part of the same pattern. Nothing I do is ever good enough because it's not what Brooke would do." My mother crossed her arms. "Well, if you're going to be hypersensitive about every little comment." "It's not hypersensitive to expect my mother to value me for who I am," I said, my voice gaining strength. "It's not hypersensitive to want acknowledgement of my accomplishments without them always being compared to someone else's. It's not hypersensitive to ask for basic respect." "Respect?" My mother's voice rose further. "I have done everything for you. I have supported you, housed you, educated you. You've done those things while making it clear they were obligations rather than choices," I countered. "You've done them while consistently undermining my confidence and dismissing my achievements." By now, the commotion had drawn Brooke and Kyle into the kitchen as well. Kyle immediately moved to stand beside me, a silent show of support. Brooke lingered in the doorway, her expression unreadable. "Do you know what it's like," I continued, "to grow up knowing that nothing you do will ever be good enough? To have every accomplishment measured against someone else's and always found lacking? To be made to feel like the second-rate version of your own sister? That's absurd," my mother scoffed. "You're creating drama over nothing." "It's not nothing to me," I said firmly. "And I think deep down, you know that. I think you know exactly what you've been doing all these years." My father stepped further into the kitchen. "Haley has a point, Diane. You do tend to compare the girls, and it's not always fair to either of them." My mother turned to him, betrayal written across her features. "So you're taking her side now? After all these years of us pushing our children to excellence?" "It's not about sides," my father said gently. "It's about recognizing that our daughters are different people with different strengths, and that's okay." "Different strengths?" My mother laughed bitterly. "Is that what we're calling it? Brooke is a lawyer at a top firm. Haley draws pictures for a living." The dismissive way she characterized my career, work I had trained for, excelled at, and built a reputation around, crystallized exactly what I was fighting against. "I'm a professional graphic designer," I corrected her. "I lead branding strategies for companies committed to sustainability. My work was featured in Fast Company last month, not that you bothered to acknowledge it. But more importantly, I'm happy. I'm fulfilled. I'm proud of what I do." "Well, good for you," my mother said sarcastically. "Would you like a participation trophy for showing up to a job that any college graduate could do?" The room fell silent. Even my mother seemed to realize she had crossed a line, though her expression remained defiant. "Wow, Mom," Brooke said quietly from the doorway. It was the first time she had spoken since entering the kitchen. "That was unnecessarily harsh." My mother turned to her with a look of surprise. "I'm simply being honest. In the real world, not everyone gets praised just for doing the bare minimum." "Haley doesn't do the bare minimum," Brooke replied. "She's actually really successful in her field. Just because it's not law or medicine doesn't make it less valuable." I was stunned by Brooke's defense. In all our years of this dynamic, she had never publicly contradicted our mother's narrative. Taking advantage of my mother's momentary speechlessness, I pressed on. "I didn't come back here looking for a fight, Mom. But I can't keep pretending that the way you treat me isn't harmful. I can't keep smiling through the comparisons and the dismissals and the constant implications that I'm somehow deficient." So what exactly do you want from me? My mother demanded. A formal apology for pushing you to be your best? A promise to never mention your sister's accomplishments in your presence? I want you to see me, I said simply. Not as a failed version of Brooke, but as myself. I want you to recognize that there are many ways to live a worthwhile life, and mine is one of them. I want you to understand that when you constantly compare me to Brooke, you're not motivating me, you're damaging our relationship. My mother's expression hardened. If your self-esteem is so fragile that you can't handle hearing about your sister's success. This isn't about Brooke's success, I interrupted. I'm proud of Brooke. This is about your inability to value me on my own terms. Diane, my father interjected, maybe it's time to listen instead of defend. Haley is telling us something important about her experience in this family. Oh, so now I'm the villain? My mother threw up her hands. After everything I've sacrificed for this family, after all the opportunities I've created for both my daughters, I'm being painted as some sort of monster because I have high expectations? No one is calling you a monster, Mom, I said, struggling to maintain my composure. I'm asking you to consider how your words and actions have affected me. I'm asking you to recognize that comparing your children the way you do isn't healthy or helpful. And if I don't agree with your assessment, she challenged. I took a deep breath. This was the hardest part, the boundary I had never dared to establish before. Then I'll need to limit my contact with you. Because I can't keep subjecting myself to this. It's taken years of therapy for me to understand that I have value independent of your approval, and I won't let that work be undone every time I come home. The kitchen fell silent again. My mother stared at me as though seeing a stranger. My father looked torn between concern and a hint of something that might have been pride. Kyle's hand found mine, squeezing gently. And Brooke was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read, something between surprise and respect. You would cut off your own mother? My mother's voice was quiet now, disbelieving. I don't want to, I said honestly. I want a relationship with you. But it needs to be one based on mutual respect, not constant comparison and criticism. I'm not asking for special treatment or excessive praise. I'm asking to be treated as an individual with intrinsic worth, not as a disappointing shadow of my sister. My mother opened her mouth, closed it, then turned and walked out of the kitchen without another word. The remaining tension hung in the air like smoke. I should go check on her, my father said after a moment, but he paused beside me on his way out. I'm sorry, Haley. I should have addressed this years ago. He squeezed my shoulder gently before following my mother. Kyle wrapped his arm around me. You okay? I nodded, though I wasn't entirely sure it was true. The confrontation had left me drained but somehow lighter, as though I'd put down a weight I'd carried so long I'd forgotten it wasn't part of me. Brooke lingered in the doorway, shifting uncomfortably. I didn't know, she said finally. I mean, I knew she compared us, but I didn't realize how much it affected you. How could you? I replied. It's been our normal for as long as we can remember. She nodded slowly. For what it's worth, I think what you just did was brave. I'm not sure I could have done it. Her acknowledgement, perhaps the first time she had ever positioned me as the stronger one, cracked something open between us. Not a resolution to decades of complicated dynamics, but a tiny fissure in the wall that had been built between us, just enough to let in a sliver of new understanding. I think I need some air, I said, suddenly overwhelmed by the intensity of the past hour. Kyle and I slipped out the back door into the night, leaving behind the house where I had never quite belonged, stepping into a future that for the first time felt entirely my own. The drive back to Chicago the next morning was mostly silent. Kyle occasionally squeezed my hand or asked if I needed anything, but he understood I was processing. The emotional confrontation had left me drained but strangely peaceful, like the aftermath of a long-needed storm. I'm proud of you, he said as we crossed the state line into Illinois. That took incredible courage. I'm not sure if it was courage or just finally reaching my breaking point, I admitted. Sometimes they're the same thing. When we arrived home, the familiar comfort of our apartment, the space we had created together that reflected our values and aesthetics, felt like a physical embrace. I curled up on our sofa, wrapped in the quilt my grandmother had made, and finally allowed myself to fully feel the emotional aftershocks of what had happened. The tears came in waves: grief for the maternal relationship I had always wanted but never had, relief at finally speaking my truth, fear about what would come next, and underneath it all, a surprising sense of liberation. Kyle brought me tea and sat beside me, present but not intrusive, offering the quiet support that had become one of the foundations of our relationship. "What happens now?" he asked when my tears had subsided. "I honestly don't know," I replied. "But for the first time, I feel like whatever happens, I'll be okay." The following days brought the expected fallout. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother the next morning: "I hope you're satisfied with the scene you created at our anniversary. Some things are better left unsaid." I showed it to Kyle, who shook his head in disbelief. "She still doesn't get it," he said. "No," I agreed. "But I didn't expect her to change overnight. Or maybe ever." I didn't respond to the text. Instead, I emailed my father, thanking him for his support and reiterating that while I needed space from my mother, I hoped to maintain our relationship. His reply came the same day, warm, apologetic, and understanding. "I've enabled this situation for too long," he wrote. "I love you both so much, but I've failed to protect you from unfair treatment. I'm trying to help your mother understand, but in the meantime, know that I respect your boundaries and am here whenever you need me." 3 days after the confrontation, I received an unexpected call from Brooke. We had rarely spoken directly without our parents as intermediaries, and never about anything substantial. "Hey," she said when I answered. "I've been thinking about what happened at Mom and Dad's." "Me too," I replied cautiously. I wanted to say, "I'm sorry." Her voice was hesitant, unfamiliar with the shape of the apology. "I never realized how Mom's comparisons affected you." Or maybe I did, but it was easier not to think about it because it benefited me. Her honesty surprised me. "It's not your fault, Brooke. You didn't create the dynamic." "No, but I participated in it. I accepted the pedestal she put me on without questioning what it was doing to you. And sometimes I even played into it because it felt good to be the favorite." The admission hung between us, painful but oddly freeing in its honesty. "Would you want to get lunch sometime?" she asked after a moment. "Just us. Maybe in Milwaukee, halfway between Chicago and home. I think we have a lot to talk about." 2 weeks later, I sat across from my sister at a small cafe in Milwaukee, both of us navigating the unfamiliar territory of a relationship unmediated by our mother's influence. The conversation was awkward at first, full of careful politeness and surface-level updates. But as we shared a dessert, something we hadn't done since childhood, the artificial boundaries began to dissolve. "I used to be jealous of you, you know," Brooke admitted, surprising me. "Of me? Why would you possibly be jealous of me?" "Because you seemed so free." She pushed her spoon through the chocolate cake we were sharing. "You pursued what you actually wanted instead of what was expected. And you found people who appreciated you for exactly who you are." "That wasn't freedom," I said. "It was survival. I had to find external validation because I never got it at home." Brooke nodded slowly. "I never thought about how much pressure there is in being the perfect one. Every achievement just raises the bar for the next expectation. Sometimes I wonder if I even wanted to be a lawyer, or if I just knew it would make Mom proud." For the first time, I saw my sister not as the golden child who had everything handed to her, but as another woman navigating the complicated legacy of our upbringing in her own way. We weren't rivals, we were two sides of the same coin, both shaped by our mother's inability to love us unconditionally for who we were. That lunch became the first of many conversations between us, a tentative bridge being built across years of manufactured competition. It wasn't always easy. Decades of established patterns don't disappear overnight, but it was genuine in a way our relationship had never been before. Meanwhile, my communication with my mother remained minimal. My father called weekly, his conversations deliberately separate from any mention of her. He made trips to Chicago twice that summer, visits that would have been unthinkable before. He had never traveled without my mother, and certainly never to see just me. During his second visit, as we walked along Lake Michigan, he confessed, "Your mother and I are in counseling. This situation has forced us to examine patterns in our marriage that weren't healthy either. I should have stood up for you more, Haley." I knew what was happening wasn't right, but I told myself it was easier to keep the peace. "You did what you could," I said, though we both knew it hadn't been enough. "No, I didn't. But I'm trying to do better now." At work, the confidence that had begun to bloom during the confrontation continued to grow. When a major eco-conscious clothing brand approached our agency, I volunteered to lead the pitch, something I would have previously deferred to more outspoken colleagues. We won the account, and my creative director credited my presentation as the deciding factor. "Whatever's changed in you recently," she told me, "it's working. You've always had the talent, but now you seem to believe in it too." My sessions with Dr. Winters shifted from unpacking trauma to building a future unencumbered by the weight of perceived inadequacy. "The confrontation with your mother was a pivotal moment," she observed, "but the real work happens in how you carry that forward." We practiced techniques for maintaining boundaries, for recognizing when old patterns of self-doubt emerged, and for celebrating achievements without the need for external validation. Slowly, the reflexive flinch when comparing myself to others began to fade. My relationship with Kyle deepened through the vulnerability of the process. Watching me stand up for myself seemed to remove the last barriers between us. "I always knew you were strong," he told me one evening as we sat on our balcony watching the sunset. "But seeing you find your voice with your family, that was something else entirely." A month later, he proposed, not with a flashy diamond that would impress others, but with a vintage emerald ring that perfectly matched my aesthetic and values. 6 months after the confrontation, my mother reached out with a text that was neither an apology nor an accusation. "Your father misses you. We're hosting Thanksgiving. You and Kyle are welcome if you'd like to come." It wasn't much, but it was an opening. After discussing it with Kyle and Dr. Winters, I decided to accept, with clear boundaries and an exit strategy in place if needed. "You've done the work to be able to engage with her on your terms," Dr. Winters assured me. "You're not the same person who felt compelled to accept whatever treatment she offered." The decision was complicated by Brooke's announcement that she and Seth were expecting their first child, news that would undoubtedly dominate any family gathering. But our newly established relationship gave me the confidence to be genuinely happy for her without fearing it would diminish me in comparison. "Mom's going to be insufferable about becoming a grandmother," Brooke warned during one of our now regular phone calls. "Probably," I agreed. "But that's about her, not us." The statement, simple but profound, summarized what had taken me years of therapy to understand. My mother's behavior reflected her own limitations, not my worth. 1 year after the confrontation that changed everything, I stood in my parents' kitchen helping prepare Thanksgiving dinner. My mother and I moved around each other with a careful politeness that wasn't warmth but was no longer openly hostile. Brooke sat at the counter, her 7-month pregnant belly making kitchen work impractical, while Seth and Kyle watched football with my father in the living room. The year had brought significant changes for all of us. My parents' counseling had led to subtle but noticeable shifts in their dynamic. My father spoke up more, disagreed with my mother occasionally, and had developed interests independent of her for the first time in their marriage. My mother remained my mother, critical and status-conscious, but the explosive confrontation had forced a reckoning she couldn't entirely ignore. My relationship with Brooke had transformed most dramatically. The artificial competition dissolved. We had discovered a genuine friendship based on mutual respect and understanding. We texted regularly, sharing everything from work frustrations to book recommendations. When she asked me to help design the nursery for her baby, it felt like the final healing of an old wound, my creative talents not just acknowledged but specifically sought out. "Could you check if the rolls are done?" my mother asked, interrupting my thoughts. I opened the oven and tested one. "Perfect," I confirmed, transferring them to a basket. She nodded. You always did have a good sense for baking. I remember when you used to help Grandma with the holiday breads. The casual acknowledgement of one of my childhood skills, offered without comparison to Brooke, caught me off guard. It wasn't effusive praise, but it was authentic appreciation, something I had rarely received from her. "Thanks, Mom," I said simply, choosing to accept the small olive branch for what it was. When we gathered around the table, I noticed another change. Among the framed family photos my mother had displayed on the sideboard was a new addition, a professional photo of me and Kyle from our engagement announcement, alongside my most recent headshot from the agency website. My creative work was finally deemed worthy of display in her carefully curated collection of family achievements. Before we begin, my father said once everyone was seated, "I'd like to say how grateful I am to have both my daughters here today. Brooke and Seth, we're excited to welcome your little one in a few months. And Haley and Kyle, we're looking forward to your wedding this spring. Your mother and I are proud of the women you've become and the partners you've chosen." My mother didn't contradict him or qualify his statement. Instead, she added, "The wedding invitations Haley designed are the most beautiful I've ever seen. 3 of my friends have asked for your contact information, by the way." It wasn't a dramatic transformation. She hadn't suddenly become the warmly supportive mother I had longed for as a child. But it was acknowledgement, specific, genuine, and offered freely. The complicated path to this moment flashed through my mind, the years of therapy, the painful confrontation, the difficult conversations and careful boundary setting that had followed. After dinner, as others settled in the living room for dessert and coffee, I slipped away to my old bedroom. It had been converted to a guest room after I moved out, but my mother had recently added an unexpected touch, a small gallery wall featuring 3 of my early artwork pieces alongside more recent design projects. I stood looking at this timeline of my creative development, this tangible acknowledgement of my path. "Is it okay?" My father's voice came from the doorway. "Your mother found those drawings in the attic. I helped her frame them. It's surprising," I admitted. "But nice." "She's trying, in her way," he said. "She may never fully understand how her behavior affected you, but she's beginning to recognize that she doesn't want to lose you from her life." "I know. And I'm trying too. That's all any of us can do." He hesitated. "I wanted to tell you something. Watching you stand up for yourself last year, it gave me courage too. I've spent our whole marriage deferring to your mother to keep the peace. But seeing you refuse to do that anymore made me realize I wasn't setting a good example for either of my daughters." Later that evening, as Kyle and I prepared to leave, my mother handed me a small package. "For your new home office," she said stiffly, still uncomfortable with direct emotional exchanges. I opened it in the car, a framed clipping of the Fast Company article featuring my design work, the one I had mentioned during our confrontation a year ago. She had not only kept it but had taken the time to have it professionally framed. "She remembered," I said softly. "She heard you," Kyle corrected gently. "Maybe for the first time." The journey from that devastating kitchen confrontation to this moment hadn't been linear or easy. There had been setbacks, painful phone calls, holiday gatherings where old patterns threatened to re-emerge, moments when the temptation to slip back into the role of the lesser daughter pulled at me. But I had done the work to stand firm in my worth, to engage without surrendering my boundaries, to accept the family I had while no longer being defined by their limitations. My freelance business, launched 6 months earlier alongside my agency position, had quickly gained clients who valued my specialized approach to sustainable brand design. Kyle and I had purchased our first home, a modest but charming bungalow we were renovating ourselves. Our wedding plans reflected our values and personalities rather than external expectations of what a celebration should be. Most importantly, I had built a circle of friends and mentors who saw and appreciated me exactly as I was, creative, thoughtful, occasionally anxious, unfailingly loyal. These relationships, chosen rather than inherited, provided the unconditional support my family of origin had not been able to offer. As we drove back to Chicago that night, I thought about what I would tell my younger self if I could somehow reach across time, that lonely, uncertain girl who believed her value was measured only in comparison to her sister. I would tell her that worth isn't comparative, that there is no finite amount of success or happiness to be divided among siblings or colleagues or friends. I would tell her that speaking truth, even when difficult, is ultimately less painful than living a half-life of silent acquiescence. I would tell her that parents, for all their outsized influence on our development, are just people with their own wounds and limitations. Most of all, I would tell her that the journey to becoming herself, fully, unapologetically herself, would be worth every difficult step. The relationship with my mother would likely never be the warm, mutually affirming bond one had once longed for. But we had found a way to exist in each other's lives with a measure of respect that had previously seemed impossible. My relationship with Brooke had evolved into something I could never have imagined, a genuine friendship between two women who had discovered they were allies rather than competitors. And I had found my voice, not just with my family, but in my career, my relationships, and my understanding of myself. Standing up in that kitchen a year ago hadn't just changed my family dynamic, it had given me permission to fully inhabit my own life. As the Chicago skyline came into view, Kyle reached over and squeezed my hand. "Penny, for your thoughts?" "I was just thinking about how different things are from this time last year," I said. "And how standing up for myself was really just the beginning." "You should be proud of yourself," he said. "I know I am." The words landed differently than they once would have, not as external validation I desperately needed, but as a reflection of something I already knew to be true. I was proud of myself too. Have you ever had to stand up to a family member who constantly compared you to someone else? How did you handle it, and did it change your relationship? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video if it resonated with you, subscribe for more content about personal growth and family dynamics, and share with anyone who might be struggling with similar challenges. Remember, recognizing your own worth is the first step to having others recognize it too. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it helps you find the courage to speak your truth in your own life.